Well, it was one of South Korea's most closely contested presidential elections in recent history. In March, conservative Yoon Suk-yeol weaponized sexist backlash against feminism, winning the race by just over 263,000 votes. The margin may have been slim, but South Korean feminists fear that the consequences for women will be severe, especially for a country that already has the highest wage gap amongst developed nations. For more, journalist Hawon Jung joins me for perspective. Now, she's also the author of the forthcoming book, Flowers of Fire, which is about South Korea's Me Too movement. Hawon Jung, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
So before we get to your book, the Me Too movement was obviously a watershed moment for women everywhere. How do you think that it was specifically perceived and adapted to the specific situation in South Korea?
Well, South Korea has, for the last couple of years, South Korea underwent a very strong wave of feminist activism unseen before. The country's women, they mounted what is arguably the most successful case of Me Too movement in Asia. And they brought down a lot of powerful men accused of sexual misconduct, including the country's most powerful poet, most famous theater director, and also a very popular presidential contender. They also successfully campaigned to legalize abortion, and also a growing number of so-called no-marriage women refusing to get married or to give birth in defiance of this social pressure on women to become selfless and self-sacrificing caregivers for family. But at the same time, this outburst of activities also drew some level of, or actually a storm of resentment among many of the young men in the country that the feminists or young women in general have gone too far. And now young men are the victims of reverse discrimination, although volumes of evidence suggest otherwise. And now, in the country's vast cyberspace and online chat rooms, feminists in general are widely called, let's say, mentally diseased who follow anti-social ideology.
So I imagine all of that context that you described there is what led you to write your forthcoming book, then?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so let's move on to the president-elect now, Yoon Suk-yeol. He denies that structural gender inequality exists in South Korea. His platform included a series of what have been described as anti-feminist proposals. Can you walk us through some of the things that he promised to do when he was on the campaign trail?
Yeah, this election was very unusual because this is the first time that anti-feminism was weaponized as some sort of a political cudgel. And Mr. Yoon, he kind of adopted, I would say, a Trump-like brand of very divisive gender politics that almost exclusively spoke to men. So he's promised to dismantle the country's gender equality ministry, which has played a central role in reflecting women's voices into actual government policies. And the ministry has championed the rights for a lot of women, like sexual assault victims, victims of non-consensual pornography, or women trying to climb up the ladder in male-dominated the workplaces, including the government agencies.
So in your book, for your book rather, you met many South Korean women in particular whose daily lives are likely to be affected by the election of Yoon Suk-yeol. What do you expect to see change concretely in women's daily lives?
Well, for one thing, like I said, the ministry has played a lot of role in promoting women's rights, and especially for working women. And a lot of women fear that there's the modest, hard-won progress they have achieved against all odds in recent years might be rolled back or seriously jeopardized. And that also includes those who got a lot of support from the ministry, like widely stigmatized single women who gave birth without getting married or husband. And they were the major beneficiaries of the support and the benefits offered the ministry. And a lot of people are worried for the future of these people who received support from the ministry, like the single mothers or sexual assault survivors, or the children of impoverished or troubled families who need support, or even the elderly women who were enslaved as sexual slaves for Japanese soldiers during the World War II.
Now, I was surprised to see an exit poll showing that more men in their 20s than men in their 30s voted for President-elect Yoon. You'd think that it would be the other way around, that older men are more likely to see feminism as a threat. Can you speak to why this appears to be such a big issue for men in their 20s in particular?
Well, it has a lot to do with the overall situation in the country. There's this growing disparity in income and opportunities, especially among the young men or young people, and also the growing jobless ooze among the young generations. And a lot of the men, especially young men, somehow blamed feminism or as a culprit behind all these problems. And that was obviously their voices were amplified by this right-wing party that successfully tapped into this anger and gave these angry young men a voice and turned them into a political force. Whereas these older generations, they may be just as sexist as young men, but they rather have this patriarchal view that sees women as more like someone to protect, or someone to protect, whereas these young men see women more as a competitor for jobs with the limited number of jobs and opportunities.
Hawon Jung, unfortunately, we have to keep it there, but thank you so much for coming on the show today, for your time.
Thank you for having me.